Alright, what is poppin', people? We are back. And to explain why we haven't been uploading lately, I've been so tired of playing Pokemon. Like, every time I try to ladder, every time I try to record, I queue into some matchup fish offense build every time, and it's just so exhausting. Having to look at this tier and go, okay, let me prepare for the good stuff, and then running into hail. And being like, okay. Okay. And then running into terrain. Be like, okay. It's just, at a certain point, man, it's demotivating to even try to build because there's so much just fringe offense that, you know, again, searches for that matchup. And, I mean, admittedly, I'm not prepped for it because, you know, I'm not prepared for the things that I view as not good. So, unfortunately, my building patterns aren't particularly good in them right now, so maybe I should start reevaluating what I'm building with. Anyhow, because I don't want to upset myself any further by trying to ladder, we're just gonna talk about a Pokemon that has been getting beyond hyped up. And, you know, last live we did with this Pokemon, Cresselia. Now, why is Cresselia looked at as so good right now? I think the first reason is we look at its stats. 120, 120, 130 bulk? That's really high, even for end-use standards. I mean, you're looking at other Pokemon that are just, you know, the breakers of the tier. Aerodactyl, not anywhere near as strong compared to the bulk. Beware, still very strong, but, you know, Cress can outspeed and kind of, you know, trade blows with it fairly freely. Copperaja doesn't really beat Cress at all. The Dragon types like Dragalge and Goodra. Dragalge generally runs bulkier sets, still strong as hell because of adaptability and because you are still running investment, but you know, it's not the first one you'd think of when you're thinking of a Specs Dragon Breaker. Maybe it's more Goodra, but Goodra's kind of uncommon. And you look at maybe the offensive water types like Inteleon and Starmie. Well, if Cress starts boosting, those struggle a little bit more unless you're like crit Inteleon, which is a pretty good set. The point being here is Cress being as bulky as it is can make it very hard to take down by just hitting it. And while Moonlight is limited in power points, which can, you know, potentially mess up Cress in the long term, it still burning through 8 power points can be kind of difficult. You know, it still gives Cress enough time to heal up repeatedly. If you're running lefties, you're still generating health passively. And it's overall just kind of obnoxious to deal with. And so, for the set that I'm going to just point out first, there are a lot of sets that you could call standard for Cress. They're all Calm Mind, though. Now, I think this is the safest set out of all of them, right? Moonblast means you can always hit whatever's out in front of you. You know, maybe it's for resistant damage. You can always hit what's there. And Substitute prevents people from beating Cress down with Toxic, which I think is a pretty reasonable form of counterplay. But beyond this, you could also see Mono Psyshock occasionally. This gives you a much better matchup against opposing Calm Mind Sigilif, opposing Calm Mind users in general. But it's obviously at the cost of being hard-walled by any Dark type. You can run both Psyshock and Moonblast, which I think is pretty valid. But then you run into the issue of, okay, well, how am I dealing with those Toxic users? Because, you know, they can outlast you occasionally. Things like, say, oh, let me think of a Toxic user, Bronzong. You're not beating it down any time with this set. And so, giving it the free cripple versus you is unfortunate. You also have this unfortunately cursed set, particularly with Keyberry. Now, what this lets you do is you could take a pretty weak physical move. You don't want it to be a knockoff, otherwise it just removes the berry. But it makes Cress even harder to take out. Even harder to, frankly, tech 4 occasionally. And this, too, can go, like, with sub. Although I think you generally want to run lefties at that point. That might be a personal preference thing. But you could switch into a resisted hit like Mienshao CC to activate the berry really easily. Or versus, say, a Copperaja or a Bronzong if they're running, like, Heavy Slam to hit you. And you can activate the berry really easily. You become even harder to bypass with maybe a really strong physical breaker. Like, say, Tyrantrum. The point that's being made, right? Cress is so fat that it's able to just sit out in front of your opponent for several turns in a row, accrue a whole bunch of boosts, and once it has a significant amount of Calm Minds behind it. Yeah, it's weak naturally. Base 75 is trash, but with enough boost, you're gonna be strong. Stab, Psyshocks, or Stored Powers are gonna hurt. Even Moonblast. If you're sub, a lot of the mons that resist Moonblast can't break your sub. And so, it can become a question of, okay, how do I even break Cress? How do I prevent it from just switching in versus something that can't break sub, like a defensive Copper Raja or a Bronzong? Well, don't worry, that's why I'm here. So, the first mon I'm going to mention is Copper Raja. Now, there is an issue with Copper when trying to view it as a Crest check. You don't beat it one-on-one unless you go, there are a few techs. So, one of the techs that I've seen a little bit is Whirlwind. It's pretty self-explanatory. You switch hard into Cress, it doesn't matter what it does, you just phase it out. And another one is Taunt. So, if you taunt Cress, it can't keep boosting, and I believe that Copper actually wins the one-on-one exchange. Cress can't accumulate boosts quickly enough to where it can actually beat Copper. You don't let it heal. And you also prevent it from subbing up again, which is just really helpful because you can make sure the damage sticks. The other nice thing about Taunt, though, is because a lot of Cress are running that Keyberry set right now, because it also gives you a Poltergeist immunity once you proc the berry, you could potentially force Cress to switch out after it's burned to the Keyberry, and that just makes it a lot easier to deal with later. Here's my favorite, though, Curse. So, Copper Raja with Curse needs 2 boosts to have a very high chance of 2-hit KOing Cresselia. And if it is Keyberry Cress, then you boost up again, and then you 2-hit KO it. You are not ever 2-hit KO'd yourself. You can boost alongside Cress fairly freely. If it's Psyshock Cress, you beat it especially hard, because, you know, Psyshock hits based on your physical defense instead of your special defense. So that's pretty cool. And if it's Stored Power, well, if you get crit, you lose. But if you don't get crit, then I think Stored Power caps out at around 40%, if I'm remembering correctly. So you do beat it in the 1-on-1. Now the next one we want to look at is Drapion. Now Drapion is interesting because it does take neutral from Moonblast. But some of the sets that we've seen lately on Drapion are things like this, where it's just based entirely around utility. And so, because Drapion is naturally going to be outspeeding whatever spot Cress hits, you know, even just Jolly or faster. I haven't used a lot of Drapion myself, but I'd run around this much speed, just because it gets you to jump on Rotom Cut, which can potentially be very good. Obviously, being a Dark type, you don't care about the mono Psychic move Cresses, and Moonblast Cress just doesn't beat you. You taunt it, and then you phase it out. As simple as that. I say it's simple. Obviously, it's still not fun. It's not a good interaction. You're probably taking a couple Moonblasts along the way. But you're bulky enough to where the Moonblasts aren't that impactful. And again, you're preventing any Keyberry shenanigans, which is just helpful. And you don't care about Sub-Cress either, even if it has like a physical defense boost already. Because Drapion's knockoff isn't very strong, you know, no attack investment. Sure, it's still stab, but if a Keyberry activates, then you're doing very, very little damage. But you got enough bulk to where you can sustain a one-on-one encounter with Cress and eventually beat it down. You don't let it boost at all. And Toxic Spikes plus Knock is just generally good utility, even just throwing Taunt there. Like, it's a generally solid utility Pokemon, beyond just counter-teching for Cress, to where you could justify it in more ways than just, I am running this Pokemon because I am paranoid of Cresselia sweeping me. Which helps. Now, Scavalier is probably the most consistent Steel type when it comes to dealing with Cress. You don't care about Moonblast, you don't care about Stored Power, really. And you run this lovely move right here, titled Mega Horn. You run all of this attack, and it is getting blasted. Cress needs an insane amount of luck to ever even consider getting by a Scav. You need a lot of support, which you can get, right? Knockoff isn't hard to pair with it. But it takes such a long time to beat down a Scavalier, that much of it. And much of the time, you just kind of have a dead team slot if you're queuing up with Cress into Scav. Now, there might be some weird counter tech that Cresselia still hasn't explored yet too much. I only showed one set, and I didn't even go into like an other options page or another set period. I could have talked about defensive Cress, yeah. But in comparison to CM, it's just so irrelevant. That's not to call it bad, it's just not present? Anyhow. Maybe there's something with like Trick Scarf with CM. And yeah, that would be annoying for Escav. But until we start seeing it, and until it's like viewed as very much a part of the meta, I'm gonna call Escav one of the most consistent Cress answers out there, alright? Leave me alone. And then we get to Guzzlord, and the next couple are gonna just be generically talk about dark types, right? So these three right here, Zoroark, Guzzlord, Bangoro, do not want to ever run into Moonblast Cress. They lose. But you wall stored powered Cress, or mono Psyshock Cress, and that is worth mentioning. It's similar to like Sigilif, wherein, yeah, you don't want to run into, hell, even Air Slash Sigil's a little annoying for these, and you don't ever want to run into Dazzling Gleam, because it just beats them down. But if you're running into one of those like Calm Mind, Psyshock, Heatwave, Roost Sigilifs, then these are good into that variant. Similar to how, with mono Psychic attacking Cress, you do beat them down with the dark types. We're almost at the end here. Despite it feeling like, I feel like we've talked about so few, but there's actually a good amount of Pokemon here. The next one I want to talk about is just these two defensive water types here, and it's really just for Haze. That's not Haze, that's Hail. It's for Haze. Now, I think it can be a little bit difficult to fit Haze on Mantine at times. I think Vaporeon has it really easy. You just Scald, Protect, Wish, and then Haze instead of like Flip, Turn, or Toxic. Mantine has a little bit more difficult because you want Scald and Roost always. And then you're probably running Defog. And then if you have to run Haze last, it's like that means you're not running Toxic or even Air Slash. So that's a little shit. But these two beat down Cress with Haze because you could never outstall Haze with Calm Mind. So they just don't let Cress ever set up. And then the last Mon, a Pokemon people don't really use that much right now, is Decidueye. And what I want to talk about in particular is Swords Dance Spirit Shackle Decid, so, you know, physical. Why not Poltergeist? Because you don't want to run into Itemless Cress or Keyberry Cress. So Spirit Shackle means Decidueye is always fine into Cress. With Jolly, you're always outspeeding the common Cress set. So you don't have to worry about it, you know, outspeeding into it KOing at all. And you very easily 2-hit KO Cress. And because Decidueye's special bulk is pretty decent, uninvested even, you're not taking too much damage if Cress hasn't been able to accumulate several boosts. Now this Pokemon's a little bit more limited in terms of where it fits. This is probably the set you'd see the most often. Brave Bird hits the Demonmon known as Beware in terms of item. We'll give it a spell tag, sure. But Decidueye is a little bit more limited in application. I think you could probably get away with it on just maybe even a generic balance team if you wanted it as, you know, a wall breaker / late game cleaner with boosted sneak. But having a Pokemon that can just switch into Cress right as it sets up CM, boost alongside it, and then Oko it is very valuable. And I think that's about it here. Now, well, we can look at a few other options on Cress that we mentioned, right? So if you're talking about defensive Cress, you'd probably be running something like this, I imagine. Moonblast, Moonlight. I'm honestly not entirely sure what I'd want to run on this right now. Probably these three moves, though, always. And then, like, Ice Beam Blast? I don't know, does Ice Beam hit anything? Ice Beam hits Delmize and friends, so yeah, maybe you run Ice Beam. Maybe you run Psychic, just so you can pop Beware a little bit harder than Moonblast does. And it's the same spread that we looked at earlier still. Because at the end of the day, I think hitting this jump point above Tyrantrum is absolutely huge for Cresselia. As it lets you check it a lot more consistently. You're not worried about the damage output even with this low an amount of bulk. Cress is still bulk enough to where even like a CB head smash, yeah, it's gonna hurt, but you can still take it. And being faster than Tyrantrum is just super helpful. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Things Cress could try to tech If it really wanted to tech it super hard to beat some of the more passive steel types, maybe there's a set out there that looks something like this. I really don't know. This looks kind of demonic. You'd probably run a different EV spread as well. I don't know, maybe at that point you'd be going like more like something like this. Still running the 20 special attack to guarantee a KO on Pangoro. I don't know, is this any good? Probably not. This looks like a really bad revenge killer. But hey, maybe it's usable. I don't know. We're talking about other options, right? That's gonna be it. I think Cresselia is a very interesting Pokemon. It's super polarizing with how people feel about it. You got a lot of people calling for it to be banned just because CM Cress can take over games very quickly, and in the eyes of these people, it doesn't have the necessary counterplay. Where in other people, I think a big narrative being pushed by the anti-banners is the metagame has room to adapt. Compare it to Sigilyph, and I think user Mary Berry said this well earlier today, where she said, Sigilyph's a Pokemon that's very resistant to metagame shifts. Its move pool lets it deal with pretty much anything that wants to rise as a form of counterplay, outside of just, you know, if offense becomes super prevalent. That's really the only thing that's ever going to dampen Sigilyph's day, and even then, you can still find opportunities against such builds with Sigil. It just requires a little bit more support. Whereas with Cress, and the set that has people up in arms, it's a lot more limited, and maybe as we develop the meta, we see that it's not as blasphemous. Which is kind of where I am with it. I feel we've already seen like a lot of the things that I mentioned here, particularly these four when we're talking about them. We're seeing Decidueye, Drapion, Escavalier, Copper with other moves as a filler, be it on Stealth Rock or just over Stealth Rock. We're seeing that people can run more than just the standard Steel type that gets mowed down by Cress, or just teams that go, well yeah, really it's just standard Steel type run by Cress. Or like, you know, having a Dark type and then losing to Moonblast Cress. But hey, we'll see. Thank you guys for watching. Again, I'm sorry that the lives haven't been out as frequently as I'd like them to be. I need to get to a point where I actually want to play Pokemon. Or at least current gen. I like past gen. Past gen and is always fun. But I need to get to that point where I'm very content with grinding out current gen games. I still play. It's just I'm not happy when I play. I don't think that's going to make the viewing experience any good. Thank you guys for sticking through the hardships. And until next time, I hope you guys are living the best life that you can. And I'll see you then. Peace.